Shalom Aleichem. We're here in New Jersey and have the honor to have a conversation with my chaver, partner, Rabbi Mike Moskowitz, senior educator for Uri L'Tzedek, building the Orthodox social justice movement together. And thought it's a nice opportunity to talk a little bit. And maybe you can share a little bit about your journey, particularly your journey within the Haredi world and what some things you learned there and benefited from that world.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah.
Borrowing language from the queer community, I was assigned secular and then identified as Haredi for about 20 years.
Right.
And now I'm some version of religiously nonconforming, right? That, and in terms of the work that I do, it's about creating the safest and the largest space for people to be the most authentic version of themselves, holding all of those different pieces and not having to choose between gender identity and religious identity or sexual identity. And so also like there's a secular identity piece that I have. And so as much as like my journey from the outside might look a little bit bumpy going from all of these different spaces, for me it's been very linear in that I've been looking for meaning and purpose to try to uncover and discover the divine truth. And so for me at 17, that brought me to yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. I had the privilege of learning in the Mir for a number of years, and then in Lakewood, New Jersey. And now, being kind of 20 years on the other side of it, it's about pushing the envelope to uncover the truth about the divine will for those marginalized segments of society that the far right has people learning Torah, but because there's a way in which they're so insular, that Torah doesn't have any sort of expression outside of the rest of the world. And so for me, being able to recognize that God is everywhere all the time, the shift from trying to bring people to this prefabricated, mass-produced, artificially constructed space that we're confining God and really allowing that Torah to get to where all of the Jews are is for me kind of the passion and the drive.
Beautiful. So being on the other, well, not totally on the other end of it, but being, having immersed and seeing all the positive benefits of being in the Haredi world, and now having a deep social justice consciousness and identity, what are some of the challenges you identify in that world that are being addressed or that aren't being addressed? It's
such a great question. The big feature of that world is the emphasis they put on learning. Right? It's Torah centric. It's Torah for Torah. It's Torah for Torah, and because it's so on some level exclusive, the biggest struggle is creating a broader, more inclusive space. And so one of the struggles at that intersection of, or the tension between innovation and tradition, is not changing the rules too much, that it's a different game, but also allowing people to feel like they're invited and welcomed. And so the far right, on some level, is so reactionary to the struggles, whether it was the Enlightenment, whether it's the Holocaust. And the irony of the reactionism is that it's never actually responding to present day, like in real time issues, but it's like responding to things that were the previous generation's struggles, which is why there's no Jewish grammar, Hebrew grammar, or prophets in yeshivas today. And so the struggles that we have today is a function of allowing people to be invited. And so for the biggest struggle is allowing the Torah to speak in first person in present tense. The fact that this is what we did in Europe is no longer really relevant to what's going on in Idaho, right? Or in anywhere. The struggle of young people today is a different struggle than 5 years ago. And that, for me, I think is the most frustrating piece, that I don't know from this. But that's great, so that's not your struggle. But for the people that this is the struggle of the day, why can't we ask the Torah what its position is right now?
And so how does that lead to social justice problems? And why do you think there's such a hyper-parochialism? Sort of an ignoring of universalism in that world. Yeah.
It's so wonderful. There's a way in which I feel that they're still worried about themselves, right? Meaning it wasn't that long ago that they were the Jewish nation was in ashes. And so even though there are 10,000 people now in Lakewood, men living, learning and full-time learning, there's still a function of us, right? And so it's inwardly focused, and it's about retention, and it's about systems that deter people from leaving and preventing the attrition, right? So let's not really learn English. Let's not go to college, right? Let's get married really young and have a lot of babies. All the things that can keep people on the inside. The reality is that now we can't prevent information the way that it used to be, right? Like in yeshivas, you couldn't have books in English or secular books. But now everybody has a smartphone. So once the information everybody has access to, we need to provide better answers, right? And so there is this, right? And now there are organizations like Footsteps and other organizations and communities of people who have left. And so the things, and people don't care about getting divorced, and now there are civil liberty organizations that help people who have left still have contact with their children, all the things, right? It's exactly the same issue of not giving somebody who's intermarried in Aliyah, right? At some point people cared. At some point, that was enough to prevent people from intermarrying.
Right.
But now, nobody's not dating, right?
Yeah,
And so it's like, that's what I mean in terms of it being like residual and reactionary, and it's not living in present tense.
Right. So, how do you root your social justice commitment in Torah?
Yeah.
Sort of maybe perhaps theologically, but also maybe halachically.
Yeah, it's so great. So for me, the recognition that social justice is the most accurate need of the moment. Like, where are people struggling is, for me, the invitation that we're meant to hear, that the Torah needs to be applied there, right? And so it's not about shifting or manipulating what the Torah says, but allowing the voice of the Torah to be amplified and applied. And so, for example, when we talk about trans issues, right? Let's say trans men getting an aliyah. So if we look where, wearing clothing of a different gender. So if we look into the Code of Jewish Law, we just need to apply what it says to these very new situations. And so for me, having the educational background of spending so long in yeshiva and having 3 ultra-Orthodox smichas gives me the tools and to be able to take what the Torah says. And one of the things in Rabbi school that we're taught is that we don't answer questions, we answer people. Right? We're answering the person who's asking the question. So because the Code of Jewish Law was written in a way that speaks about what the ideal is, and then in the different positions that are brought, because if it's not ideal, so for me, the Torah itself is infinite and it's eternal, and it doesn't need to be changed at all. It just needs to be able to be given expression to these very new and challenging situations. Right.
Very nice. So you mentioned the trans issue. I know that's a particularly poignant issue for you, trans allyship. I wonder where that issue comes from for you, and kind of what that journeys look like for you.
So for me, it's personal. There's someone in my family who transitioned, but I only came out as an ally when I had a student at Columbia University who was trans and was really struggling. The trans community of all marginalized segments has the highest level of suicide. Trans women of color in particular have the highest rate of violence perpetrated against them. And so just going out into the street as a trans person is difficult. Right? And sexual identity is there's a way in which it's concealed, that it's not physical, expressed. And certainly in Orthodox circles where there's so much gender-based spiritual practice, you walk into a synagogue, you have to make a decision. Where do you sit? Right? If you're the 10th person, does it make a difference? And so just being is very difficult. And this student was having a very difficult day and texted me that they were really struggling. And before I could respond, the student said, I want you to know how much your existence means to me. And I just felt that if I could just be, the fact that I exist, in this way, even though I was writing for Keshe under a pseudonym and wasn't public about being an ally, if that could potentially support somebody without me being, then who am I to hold this? And so that was the moment for me where I came out as an ally in a speech last year on Hanukkah. And ever since, I've been trying to explore where gender lies. For those people, right? A woman's arm and a man's arm are different in relationship to tefillin. And there's actually really interesting ways. And this for me is the biggest struggle. What part is a social construction piece where we need to embrace an egalitarian posture, and where if God isn't a misogynist, where is the traditional piece that really men and women are different, which is what allows for space to transition from one to the other. If men and women are exactly the same, then you can't transition because there's no movement. So that's kind of the dance of what in the tradition, for example, women getting an aliyah, it's not something that's halachically forbidden. The Ramah says that it's not kavod tzibor, right? It's not an honor for the congregation. So that speaks to a time 500 years ago where if a woman was getting an aliyah, it said something about the men. Today, a community that wants to embrace and raise up women, or rather take away the space that they've taken artificially, so maybe that's the greatest honor for the congregation, right? So that's a social construction piece. So I think that's why learning is so important, because if Judaism is the relationship that God intends to have with the Jewish people, then the Torah contains the details of that relationship.
Okay, so my last question for you. If there's a young Jew who's kind of on the yeshivish side, and they really agree with this, but they're afraid to kind of get involved. They're afraid to kind of get involved with social, they say, I agree, we should help immigrants and refugees and, fight racism and sexism and homophobia and the whole but I'm afraid because it doesn't fit the worldview I was taught. I'm worried about how other people are going to perceive this. What kind of eitzah, what kind of advice would you give them?
So I would say, go to the sources. And the other thing is that if you look in the Talmud, every single page is filled with rabbis who cared about other people. If we want to have a relationship with God as a parent, then we need to be able to see each other as siblings. Every single ben adam l'chaveri is a ben adam l'makom. Every way in which we interact with each other is a reflection of the way in which we see God. And if we don't see the most pronounced identity of any individual, of that being created in the image of God, and there's something wrong with our relationship with God. And so we started this program called Textual Activism, where I put these source sheets with Hebrew and English translations up a day or two before the class. And they're also on my website, RabbiMikeMoskowitz.com, that holds all of the articles and the stuff that I've done with Ori Tzedek. So it's out there, and it's allowing the text to speak for itself. It's one of the reasons why we call it textual activism, that this isn't about rabbis saying that this is what I believe, but rather if you go through the sources of rabbinic sources with rabbinic methodologies, like this is what I believe, right? Being Das Torah is the Das of the Torah, right? We want to be a Talmud Chacham, a student of the Chachma. So, there's a lot of social pressure.
Is there a consistent time people can tap into those live streams?
Yes, it's every Wednesday.
Orthodox
Facebook page does it live at around 7 o'clock.
Good. Now, also, we're launching the summer fellowship this summer for grad students and undergrads who want to spend 4 weeks in Manhattan, both learning Torah on social justice and learning activism, social justice activism, in the theory of it, but also working on various campaigns. So if you're interested, please send us your resume, email us. You can find all the information on the website of how to contact us, info@yutzedek.org. And we look forward to hearing from you. And if there's other campaigns you want to work on, you want to put the Tava Yosher in your community to certify that your kosher restaurants are also Yosher, they also treat their workers properly. Or you can be in touch with Rav Mike at yutzedek.org, right?
Yes, and if you want somebody from Uri Tzedek to come to your community as a scholar in residence, or to provide material, or to come to your college campus, please be in touch with us. And we live in very difficult times, but God forbid it should ever get easier to get involved.
Yeah. So we believe that it's important to advocate for justice and do it from a Torah-rooted place with Yirat Shemayim and Avat Hashem and with the light of the Torah.
Thank you very much.